So today we're going to talk about The Substance, and if you haven't seen it yet and you're a horror fan and you especially like body horror, I seriously don't want you to watch this video. I want you to just go see it because obviously I need to go into full spoilers because this is my analysis and breakdown, and also I want to talk about why it might be the best horror movie that's come out in the past 5 years. Despite my thoughts on the X trilogy being so amazing, I know it's not the best. Like, I know that it has its flaws. I think The Substance might be one of the best or the best in a really, really long time. And I would hate to rob you of that experience of you not being able to see it because I spoiled the entire thing for you. So I do think that you should go. If you don't want to go and you just want to know what it's about, I'm gonna explain what it's about. But I do want to say this director's other movie, Revenge, is very good as well. So if you liked The Substance and you're looking for another movie, that's a really good one. I think this is literally her second movie, which is totally crazy. So I'm gonna do a little breakdown of what happens in the movie, but I also want to talk about its significance, I think, to me, and also why specifically it's so traumatizing and it's so effective. I was gagging at certain horror movies, and it was a fun gag. It was a playful scream. This movie, I was nauseous to the point where I was a little bit terrified and scared. So I'm just gonna do a quick synopsis of the movie before I start. So Elizabeth Sparkle is a aerobics star. She has been a star for a really long time. She's like in her 40s, played by Demi Moore, who is 61 years old but literally looks incredible. Elizabeth Sparkle faces a devastating blow on her 50th birthday when her boss fires her. And her boss is this kind of gross character who's like money hungry and really rude and kind of gross and really misogynistic, really bad. So Elizabeth Sparkle, although she's extremely rich, she's made it, she's a beautiful apartment, she's in extreme distress that she was fired and she's not in the limelight anymore. So she gets this proposition from a weird guy at her doctor's office, and it's like this mystical sci-fi thing where she gets something called the substance, and this substance promises to enhance her and make a better version of her. But it ends up being that when she takes this substance, which is an injection, another woman comes out of Elizabeth's body, played by Margaret Qualley, and Margaret Qualley's character's name is Sue. And Sue comes out of Elizabeth's body like a birth, like a Cronenbergian birth. And the deal is Elizabeth Sparkle's consciousness gets to live in this younger body of Sue, but they have to switch every 7 days and they have to get food injected throughout the 7 days because the consciousness can only live in one person at once. What ends up happening is Sue gets really greedy because she wants to live young forever and she wants to not switch back into the older body. So what happens is the older body starts to die, and what you get is this like amalgamation of body horror and social commentary, and by the end of it, it's the most like horrific body horror scene I've ever seen in my entire life. Elizabeth Sparkle becomes a homunculus and she becomes a blob sort of creature who is so consciously, emotionally, mentally, physically gone from her body that she is no longer human. When I was like a preteen, like 13 and 12 kind of, I struggled really, really badly with social anxiety. And I still do struggle with social anxiety, but it was really bad to the point where I just constantly had a stomach ache all the time, and I was genuinely scared of things like going to the bathroom. It gave me like seriously a pit in my chest. I wouldn't ask people for help. I became hyper independent from a really young age because I was too scared to ask for help. I was too scared to talk to people. I had like always one friend, and I would just talk to that one friend and nobody else. And a lot of people, I think, thought I was shy, but I was scared for my life. I was scared for my life. So my coping mechanism was to invent fantasy scenarios where I would like replay fantasies in my head to kind of ease my anxiety, because I would just kind of live in my little fantasy world for a while. I would just think about a fantasy that would make me feel better. The first one, and like the most common one, was that I could control time and I could pause time specifically. So I just thought about constantly, obsessively, how great it would be to just pause time so I could just be alone for a little while, or take a nap or eat a snack and just be completely alone and not worry about how I'm being perceived and not be so terrified. I just would be in class thinking, I wish I could pause time. I wish I could just pause time right now so nobody else was here except for me. Having anxiety is really exhausting. Like, you are so exhausted all the time because your body's always in fight or flight and you just get really tired really easily. So, but the one that I want to emphasize, and the whole point of me telling this story, my other fantasy was that I wished something terrible would happen. So I wish something would level the playing field, if that makes sense. I would fantasize that aliens, it was always aliens, or it was always like crazy, it was something really cosmic and crazy, would come down and destroy the roof, or like something would happen that was so crazy that everybody kind of had to band together. Something that would just cause people to focus on survival to the point where there was nothing to be embarrassed of. I wanted to connect with people and I wanted relief from my anxiety. I wanted everybody to just get to the baseline survival instinct where we all were on the same playing field and we all had the same goal. And also, I automatically wouldn't be the most embarrassing thing in the room if there were aliens, because I would automatically be on the human side, if that like even makes sense. Like, I didn't want anyone to get hurt. I just wanted like a unifying force that made it so I could be normal for a second and I felt normal. So how does this relate to a horror movie that I saw when I was 22? So this is the first thing that I thought of when I left the theater, and I couldn't stop thinking about it, and it was kind of actually making me a little bit sad because I was thinking about how much I haven't kind of changed. So I went to the Substance on opening night, and that means it was packed, and I usually don't like that. I usually try my best to have a few seats in between me and somebody else. I just don't like to be right next to someone in the theater. I don't like people in my personal space. I still very much have social anxiety. I have made leaps and bounds in dealing with it, but one of the things is like someone right next to me, even if it's my best friend, still I get deeply, not even uncomfortable, just scared for my life. It's so strange, but it's like I will literally make sure I'm not chewing too loudly. So when it's opening night and it's packed, it comes with a huge amount of stress for me. But I push through it. I always push through it. It doesn't affect my life. I will still go to the movie theater. And it's just going to get better from here because social anxiety just gets better the more that you push your limits, and I've learned that. But when I found myself surrounded by strangers seeing this movie, I was not exactly excited about it. I'm like, okay, now I have to be kind of mindful of the way that I'm acting. Like, it just kind of sucks because I have to police myself a little bit. But I was waiting for so long to see this movie, so I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go. It's gonna be fine. Like, so when I had people on either side of me, I was like, okay, I really need to just focus on the movie because I don't want to see it again to focus. I don't want to focus on what they're thinking about me. I just need to focus on the movie because I'm excited to see it. But by the time the ending of this movie played, and I was 10 minutes away from completely barfing on everybody, I was literally going from making sure I wasn't swallowing my drink too loudly to screaming and gagging and yelling with everybody in the entire theater. Because by the end of this movie, I had heard my neighbors around me reacting so viscerally that it literally felt like something supernaturally horrifying and disgusting had happened in that theater. Like, by the time the end happened and there was blood covering the entire screen, I swear to God, I was not worried about if I passed out anymore. I wasn't even worried about if I passed out on a stranger. And that is the unifying force. It literally was like when I was 13 thinking about something that would just level the playing field. This movie was so scary and so horrifying and so disgusting. It leveled the playing field like something actually traumatic happened to me and my neighbors in the movie theater. It's something that I wanted so badly when I was 13, was something so grotesque and unnatural that it would put aside all the superficiality that gave me social anxiety. The things that give me social anxiety are superficial things that are just about how I'm being perceived and if I'm being rude or if there's something that I'm not aware of that I'm doing that's annoying. That's my worst fear. So at the end of this movie, we were all just people that did not want that happening to us. It did something that I have always wanted to happen but never would happen because there aren't such things as aliens. So by the end of this movie, we were not strangers anymore. We were something else. We were people that were suddenly acutely aware of how we are made of meat and how little we want that to happen to us. Not only did I love this movie, but I walked out of the theater thinking this is like perfection. I'm not only satisfied and kind of exhausted and nauseated, but I think this is maybe perfection. I think this is maybe the most perfect horror movie I've ever seen. So I want to, in this video, pick apart this movie and tell you why I think it's flawless and why it is so fucking scary and it's akin to a literal traumatic event happening to the people in the theater. And I'm not being fucking dramatic when I say that. Seriously, this is the one movie I would not just recommend to people who want to see a horror movie that's a good horror movie. I am really liberal in recommending people movies that are disturbing, and this one I would not recommend to most people. Most people should not see this. It is so incredibly fucked up. First reason, and most kind of fundamental reason why this movie is so good is the contrast. So every single great horror movie has contrast, and you might not have been able to put your finger on what contrast is, but it's really obvious when you start noticing the pattern. Like the first horror movie ever made is basically all contrast. I mean, all movies back then were black and white, but it had skeletons and bats and ghosts and high shadows, and horror has basically been built off of contrast. And my favorite example of this is the bright snow contrasted with the blood and the body horror in The Thing, like the pure of the snow versus like the horrors of what happens. And then also emotionally, the contrast between the camaraderie of the men and the distrust and the extreme fear they are fearing of each other and the lack of loyalty they can actually have to each other now. So like in The Thing, which is one of the most fantastic horror movies of all time, you have emotional and visual contrast. Pearl also does this, which is like inarguably a fantastic horror movie. Even though I like X better, Pearl is an example of contrast that is so fucking good. She has like manic depressive episodes of extreme highs where she's fantasizing about her life and extreme lows where she's literally murderous. The visual of like her decrepit rotting house with the like bright Texas background is like a perfect metaphor for like not only her future, but that the rot is inside of her and it has nothing to do with the outside world. And like, although Pearl is a victim of like misogyny, she is the problem. Fundamentally, she's the problem, and the contrast of those two things makes for such a good horror movie. And it's not only like blood on pavement, it's like contrast is so fundamental to horror. Our best visuals in horror are contrast visuals, and they seriously, I don't think that you can get better than a high contrast scene in a movie that is like in The Substance. You have emotional and visual contrast just like in Pearl and The Thing. Like the movie's most intense scenes are literally in a black and white tile bathroom. You have the contrast of the two women's appearances. The really youthful, bright, kind of fun, sexy one versus the body horror that becomes of the almost dead woman, which is so crazy. The first instance of contrast in this movie is the very beginning shot is of Elizabeth Sparkle's Hollywood star, and there's a bunch of people walking over it, and like there's a ketchup spill that's especially gross on it, and it really was high contrast in my mind. It's like the beauty prestige of having a Hollywood star, and having people spill a burger on it is like emotional and visual contrast to me. You also quite literally see high contrast from a design perspective, not only with the graphic design of The Substance poster, but also in the movie, the cards that they receive and like the injections and the instructions are all super high contrast. And of course I found the font. I did use the font in my video. Number one, contrast. That is why, first of all, it's a fantastic movie. It's not the titular point, but without the contrast of this movie, you don't have as much punch with the end, and with this story, you don't care about it as much. The second factor that makes this so scary are the visuals, but it's more than your regular beautiful movie visuals. You're literally scared of this movie's visuals in a way that you're scared of what the movie's going to show you before it shows you it. From the very beginning, it has a lot of micro shots of like really close, really close shots of things that are normal, and then they get progressively more disgusting. But you can tell from the minute that they show one of these micro shots that you're scared of whatever they're going to show you in that level of detail and in that level of like zoom. It starts off kind of unassuming, these like extremely zoomed in shots, and then you start to dread what's coming when there's this really disgusting eating scene with the boss, and he's eating these shrimps and it's truly gross, and you're like, okay, I don't want to know what's going to happen that I have to see in this 500K vision. I don't want to see that. You immediately know that this movie is going to show you horrors without restraint, and it does. And it does not disappoint, and it delivers this. And I was partly expecting that it wouldn't, which is crazy. You eventually see needles, body horror, fluids, everything in such an HD vision of it. It's genuinely so disgusting from the get-go. From the first instance of horror, it's disgusting. And you literally fear what they're going to show you next. Like, the movie sets up fear in you because you don't want to see that. Visually, we're given like a desolate, apocalyptic Los Angeles, and a lot of viewers would just think this is maybe budget constraints, or maybe wouldn't even notice it that the Los Angeles is so dystopian and so barren. But this subtly removes you from your own sense of reality, which is a comfort. Movies that are too set in our reality are comfortable in a way because we feel like we understand it, and that's comfortable to us. Things that we understand are comfortable. Because we're not secure in this dystopian Los Angeles, we are fundamentally uncomfortable. It's something that we've seen a million times in movies, and if you've been there, you've seen it a million times. That's not the real Los Angeles. It's not as clean and as void of people and things. It's crazy the way that they show it, that it isn't obvious, but you do know you're in a different reality. The next reason this is such a great movie is the context and its awareness of its existence in the world. Coconut tree phenomenon comes back again. Just as any other sphere of creation or music or art, horror does not exist in a vacuum. And this is extremely important for horror because ultimately, if you have a horror idea, it's like shit or get off the pot. Because if someone makes it, you can't really make it. Remakes don't get respected in horror as much because once you've seen a horror idea, you're not surprised by it. You've seen it. Horror by design is not forgettable. So if you're going to make a horror movie, you need to exist in the context of other movies. Audiences are literally addicted to this next idea. The Substance did not disappoint in this way. So horror is always innovating, but because it was so original, it ultimately called back to other horror movies in a way that was so obvious and so direct. I think I saw a lot of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas references, especially in the apartment. Her apartment getting more and more disgusting really reminded me of that. And also just like the visuals of like the fisheye kind of lens really reminded me of that as well, along with the color palette. I think it took a lot of inspiration from that, and although that's not a horror movie, it is horrifying. This is the most obvious reference. You have the Shining reference with the carpet. Another really obvious reference is the Cronenbergian vibe of the entire movie. It's almost like these callbacks are dog whistles to other horror fans, and it almost insinuates that you're in for something that you haven't seen before, because if a director is so overt with symbols and callbacks and metaphors, you kind of inherently know you're going to see something new. And this is frightening because it's what you haven't seen that scares you the most, especially if you've seen hundreds of movies. The last reason that this is fantastic is the metaphor. And I don't want to say that every great horror movie has to have this like cultural, philosophical metaphor to it, but I think the best ones definitely do. I think this is why horror became my favorite genre a long time ago. Not only did I always just really get attracted to it, just visually and like aesthetically and thematically, but it felt like it tackled subjects that weren't allowed to be talked about beforehand. And I want to give you some examples of horror movies that are glaring metaphors for like other cultural stuff that is not easy to talk about. I'm not a huge Alien fan, but the 1979 film Alien is literally said to be a metaphor for the horrors of forced pregnancy and the trauma of that in men, which is actually one of my favorite movies. I don't know why I never talk about it. It's on any of my lists because I'm stupid, but I love Men, and that movie is so glaringly a metaphor for like the types of misogyny, and it's very scary. In Eraserhead, it's like a metaphor for his anxiety as a new parent, and it's really gross, but that's the metaphor. Talk to Me is a metaphor for addiction and dealing with addiction and how it hurts everyone around you. And I Saw the TV Glow is a metaphor for the trans experience and not knowing your gender identity and thinking that you're wasting your time if you're not living in your true identity. And The Substance happens to be the cosmic horror of aging in a society that does not value what comes with age. Age brings wisdom, experience. These things are not really valued. In a dystopian Hollywood world, in an insecure character's mind, the only thing that matters is how much attention that she's getting and how she's literally doing it to herself. Just like they kept reiterating in this movie, you guys are one person. She keeps doing this to herself by making this the only thing that matters to her. She's rich and she has a beautiful apartment. She could just have a great time and relax and enjoy her age. She did not have to do this. That's the thing, like she did not have to do this at all. The reason her spin out is so drastic and fucking insane and horrifying is because this is what happens when you allow the outside world to not only define who you are as an individual, but define what gives you value as a human being. And if you let everyone else do that, it's metaphorically you're going to become a homunculus because you're not grounded to what you think is important to you. If you have no anchor, you literally will let anything shape the perception of yourself. This horrific body horror climax is a perfect metaphor for that. Literally, it's perfect. I can see criticisms of this movie of people saying the characters are shallow and the women are like literally animalistic in their pursuit of fame and the men are just caricatures of misogynistic men. But I think it's really purposeful in making you feel unsettled, and it has a total, like, everything has a purpose in this movie. Every person in this movie becoming a caricature of themselves is further making it more unhinged and more removed from our reality. And this makes you as the viewer feel deeply, deeply, deeply insecure and scared, just like how the main character feels. Like, it literally makes you feel like the way she's feeling. All the emotions she's feeling, you feel. Disgust, horror, insecurity, and you also start rooting for her. Like, you want her to make it to her New Year's Eve show, you want her to be famous and rich because you start caring about what she cares about, which is you didn't give a fuck at the beginning, like you don't care. At the end, she's literally not herself. She's mentally gone and she's lost her consciousness along the way. Her consciousness has left the fucking building. So, in conclusion, I think this is the scariest movie I've seen in a very long time. I will not be watching it again soon because it was so scary. And I have to say my favorite part is that it went in all the directions I never thought that any movie would go. And I genuinely think it's flawless. I think I've never said this about a movie publicly, but it's flawless. I don't see any single flaw with it. I don't want people to get wrapped up in the metaphor of this all. I want you to just enjoy the movie and have fun with whoever you're watching it with. And if you watched it, let me know what you think, and thank you for clicking on my review. We are officially monetized, so Please watch my videos. I don't make videos for any other reason than I just want to create good content, like, because if it weren't for content creators that I enjoy talking about stuff I enjoy, I wouldn't get anything done. The amount of hours of cleaning and work is countless. So I just want to give it back. I think that's kind of like my goal. So although I monetize and that's really, really fun, and I have a lot of fun things that I can do, I just want to do the best possible content and talk about the things that I want to talk about because I have a lot of opinions. Thank you for clicking on my video, and I hope you have a great day or a great night, because it is probably a night, let's be honest.